Jeff Todd here for MLB Trade Rumors. You know, over at MLBTradeRumors.com, we just published our annual list of out-of-options players. We hear that phrase kicked around a lot, options. What does it mean in this specific context? Why does it matter, especially at this time of year? That's what we're going to cover today. In the meantime, please run down below, subscribe, be sure to like the video if it's useful. Let's get to it. Options. All right, let's start with the basics. Every team has a 40-man roster of big league players, but not all of those guys are active at any given time once the season begins. Used to be you got 25 guys, now there's 26. Options come into play when you're moving a guy between the active and inactive side of the MLB 40-man roster. Now, it's best not to think of options so much as option seasons. If you have an option left, that means you can be moved between the active and inactive side of that 40-man roster, that is between the major leagues and the minor leagues, as much as that team wishes. There are some rules about timing and frequency and things like that, but essentially the option gives the team flexibility. If you don't have a need for that player at a given time, or if you don't like the way they're performing, you can drop them down from the big leagues to the minors while keeping them on the 40-man roster. Now, a player with options who's already on the 40-man roster can be carried in the minor leagues or in the major leagues at the start of the season. That's up to the team, no problem. On the flip side, we have players that are out of options. Remember, that's what we started off with at the top of this show. You can review a list of all such players at MLBTradeRumors.com. Those guys face a decision, or rather the team faces a decision on them at the end of camp. If you're on the 40-man roster and you're out of options, you must be carried on the active 26-man roster, or instead, you must be removed from the 40-man roster. In that case, that player would be exposed to waivers, meaning that every other team in the league would have a chance to add them to their own 40-man roster. It creates a decision point on those players. Carson Fulmer of the White Sox, Jeff Hoffman of the Rockies, players like that, guys that used to be top prospects, they need to be on that roster, on that MLB active roster to open the season, or they will be exposed to waivers, meaning that another team could get them. There are two other major classes of players in camp factoring into these decisions as well. One, prospects that haven't yet been added to the 40-man roster. They didn't need to be added. They're competing for jobs. Teams can put them in the minors without having to mess with this 40-man roster at all. It keeps those precious spots free. So they have the highest bar to clear in making a team. And then there are non-roster invitees, guys that were brought in on minor league deals, sent to camp, given a chance to compete for a job. Lots of guys you've heard of are in that camp right now. They are trying to get a job. The thing is, they could play in the minors to open the season. Many of them have opt-out clauses in their contracts that gives them a chance to skedaddle back to the open market if they're not added to the active roster at a certain point in time. That creates yet more roster pressures. So teams are obviously dealing with multiple variables going on here in managing their 40-man roster, keeping their possibilities open throughout the course of the season, and trying to craft the best possible team right out of the gates. So as I said, you're thinking about the long term here. If you're adding a prospect to your 40-man roster and your active roster for the start of the season, even before you think about the service time implications, you know that you're taking away one 40-man roster spot that you didn't have to at that point in time. A high barrier to clear. Likewise, giving a guy who has options remaining a spot on the 26-man roster could mean forcing you to drop a player who does not have options remaining. And then looking over at the side of the veteran non-roster guys, you hate to lose them as well. You don't want to let that guy walk. At the same time, if you put them on the roster to start the season, many of those guys don't have options. So if you decide you'd rather stash them in the minor leagues, too late. Now you have to expose them to waivers to remove them from your active roster. Needless to say, it behooves teams to look ahead and think hard about the players they most want to have around for this season and the future. There are a lot of situations around the league where options play a big role. Take a look at the A's second base position. They've got guys like Jorge Mateo, Franklin Barreto that have been around competing out of options. They also added a player to that mix, Tony Kemp. He's out of options. So they're not going to be able to keep all of those guys around, move them up and down as they see fit throughout the course of the season. Now, I tried to dig up sort of a perfect storm situation to illustrate this, and the best I could come up with was probably the Braves left-handed relief situation. You have Grant Dayton on the 40-man roster. He's out of options, so he needs to be on the active roster or he'll be exposed to waivers. You have a few non-roster invitees competing for positions. Tyler Matzik, Chris Russin, veteran guys that have been in the big leagues, they're in camp on minor league deals. You also have an experienced big leaguer who does have options, AJ Minter. He's already been optioned down, so they've decided against keeping him, but he would have been an option. And Phil Pfeiffer, a prospect, starting pitcher in the long run, maybe interesting relief arm. Well, he is on the 40-man roster, but he does have options remaining. So carrying him to open the season might mean parting with a few of those other guys and closing off some possibilities as the year goes on. I hope that helps you understand this somewhat complicated issue. Please do subscribe below, like this video, and we'll see you again tomorrow.